We live at a time when natural habitats are fast giving way to a man-made world of built environments. From the first length of bamboo lashed to another to hold up a leafy shield against sun and rain, to today's masonry and welded steel, the human race has sought to perfect its dominion over nature, bending it, cutting it, forming it, and transforming it into an architecture of necessity as well as expression. We are surrounded all our lives by all sorts of built things. We define our buildings and create them. And yet, because we live in them, are encompassed by them, we are in turn constantly recreated in these spaces. Is it possible then to look at the architecture around us and ultimately find ourselves? Can architecture express our desires as eloquently as a kundiman or balitaw? Can architecture freeze in wood, stone, or steel the poesy of our imaginary landscapes? Can architecture mirror history, hand down from generation to generation, a record of a nation's rites of passage in the way of an oral epic narrative? What pieces of our souls lie amid the roughly hewn stones of Spanish colonial structures? What remnants of rhyme and reason can we retrieve from the rubble of revolution and war? Do dusty ghosts of old dreams haunt the mass-produced spaces of the American colonial period? The language of architecture is silent, cryptic, but powerful and persuasive. Yet few of us take the time to read its meanings, inscribed across our skylines, unveiling our truths and confessing our contradictions. When we learn the art and language of architecture, we learn the art and language of our larger selves as well.
Karkar is a picturesque historic town about 40 kilometers south of Cebu City.
Kay paminaw po gani, murag may mga katunggan tingin ni dinhi kay nagkawat ni diha og tabay, nakakuha mi og puno at bakaw.
It is a town of many, many stories. A town at once accessible and full of open secrets. Much of Kakar's character is shaped by serendipity of place. It is the political, economic, and cultural delta in the southern part of the province. Even as the low coastal plains are inundated every time the town is visited by rain or inclement weather, the townspeople find themselves thrust time and again into active roles in the collective theater of the island's history. Karkar is unique as well in its ability to record and preserve this history in its art and architecture. In pre-Spanish times, Karkar was part of an indeterminate area called Xialo in the earliest developed part of the island, in the southeastern coast of Cebu. Itinerant junks and coasters, bringing fine silk and porcelain from the Celestial Kingdom, regularly visited Cebu Island. The exigencies of written history, however, place the first recorded reference to Xialo in the latter half of the 16th century. Its territory reduced and circumscribed by the Spaniards, Xialo came to be mentioned by Miguel de Luarca as a village of not more than 500 natives under an encomienda system established by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi in 1571. The old Karkar was not a coastal settlement. Unlike other seaside villages in the island, it lay inland on a tongue of cultivable land, surrounded on three sides by the Minag-a, a river that emptied a little further downstream into the sea. Here a stone church was built, with a thatched roof, possibly not much bigger than a chapel. It was dedicated to Santa Catalina. One can only imagine today the power that this semi-permanent structure must have exerted on the imagination of the early Filipinos. Certainly, it inculcated in early Carcareños a willingness to be conscripted to the wars and labors of the colonizer. In all likelihood, the presence of this church may have even attracted unwanted attention from outlying areas. Despite its hidden location, the village was not so obscure as to escape the notice of Muslim slave raiders who had to paddle their prahus upriver to reach their target. In one such raid, the Muslims destroyed the village, burned down the church, and took many villagers captive. The beleaguered residents transferred their settlement some 4 kilometers further inland. The story is told that Santa Catalina, wearied by the Moro attacks, disappeared from her pedestal one night, only to be found later on higher ground, in a place called Mawag, where the road branched out into two, one going to the west across the island's Cordillera, and the other going further to the south. Another church was built, and the new settlement came to be known as Karkar, named after a small town in northern Spain. As in any history of place, Karkar's past is a past shaped as well by the viability of human desire and aspiration. And it is in Karkar more than any other town in Cebu, that an evolving collective vision found continuity of form. By the 19th century, Karkar's advantage of place had attracted the expansionary appetites of Chinese mestizo families like the Osmeñas, the Regises, the Gantuangcos, the Climacos, who, except the Sarmientos, were prominent citizens in the port city of Cebu. The entry of the new elite class transformed major facets of community life. Chinese mestizo capital catalyzed a shift in economy from subsistence agriculture to the large-scale production of sugar cane. Tomas Osmeña established a sizable hacienda in Barrio Canasuhan, and he would come to own the only steam-powered sugar mill in Karkar. Other families like the Regises, Gantuangcos, and the Tanud-Tanods also owned private carabao-driven mills called Intusan. By the time the port of Cebu was opened to foreign trade in 1860, Karkar had become a bustling town of almost 2,000 houses, with a plaza complex constituting such permanent structures as a church, a convento, a cemetery, and a municipal hall. Plaza Morada was located on a hill overlooking the residential portion of the town. Although no longer evident today, some Karkar residents remember a time when the plaza was enclosed within the ruins of a kota, or stone fortification, with lookout towers on every corner. Stand-alone watchtowers, or baluarte, were built in the barrios facing the sea. Some of these watchtowers can still be found in the sitios of Bas, Catarman, Ocaña, and Tuyum. Certainly, the town Principalia now had much to protect, but the sword their prosperity wielded was double-edged, turned inward as much as out. Santa Catarina Street, directly below the town plaza, is home to a collection of period houses belonging to the town Principalia. Of these houses, the Sarmiento House, built in 1859, is one of the oldest. The house was built of stone, clay tile, and wood by Roman Protasio Sarmiento, a Chinese mestizo textile merchant from Manila who married a Karkar maiden. The house was built in the same year that Fray Antonio Manglano embarked on the construction of a new parish church, the one that still stands to this day. Sarmiento, who had grown wealthy from trading and agriculture, was gobernadorcillo during this period, and he played an active role in the construction of the new church. Sarmiento's great-great-grandsons began the work of restoration in 1991, and today the house stands as eloquent testimony to the lifestyle and building technology of the period. It marks the beginning of what can be called the golden age of Karkar. The Regis and Gantuangco families had settled around the Lungsod, or the Old Town, in Barrio Valladolid. Together, and sometimes in spite of each other, the families built a village theater tradition that came to be known throughout the entire province as the Linambay. The Linambay became the Cebuano version of the Comedia, or Moro-Moro, a long-winded play that ran the length of a 9-day novena, attending the celebration of the annual fiesta. The Linambay, as a dramatic form, apparently sprang from the strength of the oral epic narrative as an indigenous literary tradition. Through such cultural extravaganzas, the townspeople felt obliged to display to one and all the newfound prosperity. Karkar, in consequence, became known in the province as La Segunda Ciudad de Cebu. The most influential figure of this time was Don Florencio Noel, whose headship of the town spanned the three changes of government at the turn of the century. He was influential in the field of art as well. The Noel clan brought into Karkar, either through cajolery or by marriage, the Abellana family of sculptors and painters, as well as the renowned musician Brigido Lacandason, who single-handedly produced a whole generation of musically inclined Karkareños. Such are history's trade-offs, however, that Karkar also goes down in the books as the site of the treacherous assassination of the legendary Leon Kilat, or Lightning Lion, leader of Cebuano revolutionaries in the Filipino fight for independence in 1898. Leon Kilat's betrayal came within a few hours of his arrival at the hands of the town's Principalia, who considered him a mere troublemaker. His murder demoralized the rebels, and the town was quickly restored to Spanish control. The same town leaders would usher Karkar into the 20th century and American colonial rule with nary a protest. The first permanent structure that the Americans built in Karkar was a school. It followed a standard design prepared by American architect William Parsons, but it expresses a developing local sense of aesthetics. The 1930s were productive years for architecture in Karkar. The parish priest, the Reverend Father Anastasio del Coro, undertook the construction of a convent school for girls, perhaps in response to the secular education being dished out across the town plaza. Father del Coro invited Belgian nuns of the Order of the Immaculate Heart of Mary to run St. Catherine's School. The school became one of the most prestigious schools in the province, attracting young women from all over and paving the way for St. Teresa's College, its sister school in the capital city. It was also in the 30s when Mariano Mercado, an architect, came home from studies in Spain and was elected mayor of the town. Mercado's urge to build was irrepressible. He built the town dispensary, now a famous landmark in front of St. Catherine's. The dispensary, for transcending the demands of mere function and expressing local artistry, went against the prescribed architectural style of the time. The mayor then built a public swimming pool at the back of the dispensary. Karkar soon attracted many visitors from the capital city and other towns, for it was the only town in the province to have such a facility. But Mercado's building spree had only just begun. He tore down an existing bandstand built by Don Florencio Noel and replaced it with a monument in honor of Jose Rizal, in line with a decree requiring towns to build one in the plaza. Then he chose the important Rotonda, where the roads branched out on the southern edge of town as the site of the new bandstand. Karkar would never have it so good again. Although spared by its inland location, the devastation of the Second World War, Karkar is once again in great danger of losing its soul. The seduction lies on many fronts. Through the years, the plaza has lost its symmetry in an extravagance of statuary and infrastructure that endangers the town's stake in sensibility and substance. It is perhaps a hankering in the collective unconscious for the halcyon days of a more prosperous past. Since the war, Karkar has not recovered its advantage over history and has sunk back into relative obscurity. Instead, other towns like Mandaue, Danao, Toledo, and Opon have grown in income and population to earn their charters as cities of Cebu. Consequently, Karkar as a town today is like a woman grown careless about herself. The townspeople raised nary a protest when the provincial government in 1996 announced, in the name of progress and the promise of economic opportunity, a road widening project in the southern part of the province. And Karkar is in the way. The project stands to destroy not only the rotonda and the bandstand, it would also cut in half many of the old Spanish and American colonial houses on both sides of the main thoroughway. Karkar as a town today thus provokes many questions. What brings about the decline of such a town? Does it lose its vigor in the suit for peace and prosperity so dearly bought? Is the collective vision shaped and built on shaky ground but expressive only of the aspirations of a disappearing town elite? The contradictions remain unresolved even to this day. And yet there is, among some descendants of the town's prominent families, a growing desire to pursue the old vision.
Karkar has so many antique houses, and I thought maybe if people around Karkar would sort of have they create a value for their heritage here, preserve their antique houses, ancestral houses, then it could be a village museum.
Will the rest of Karkar's townspeople rally to the call? Was it their vision too? Or was it all just someone else's dream? Only time will tell.
There is nothing like a leisurely ride around the important ports in the Visayas to make one realize how far such settlements have gone and yet how distant they still are from where they have to go. It is in the Visayas where the archipelagic character of the Philippines is most manifest. Here, the waters mete out life and death and divide even as they connect the region's islands and provinces. Since for many centuries, it was travel by sea that fostered cultural and economic exchange. The Visayan Islands enjoyed a distinct advantage in pre-Hispanic times. It is no small wonder then that the region's important settlements grew around excellent natural harbors, providing shelter from the elements and rich opportunities for commerce and trade. It is thus in such busy port cities as Iloilo and Cebu that the Visayan has been the most outward looking and most receptive to the influences of the foreign trader and colonizer. And nowhere is this more evident as in the legacies of structure and infrastructure still to be found, even as progress and increased contact with the outside world slowly defaces a disappearing world. Iloilo is the luckier one, twice blessed by nearby fertile plains in which to produce rice, sugar, and other staples, as well as a good harbor to promote coastwise trades in these products. Favored by the Spaniards, even as early as the time of Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, who fled to Panay Island because of chronic food shortage in Cebu, Iloilo and its environs soon bore the permanent marks of the colonizers' favor. It was in 1855 when Iloilo became the first port in the Visayas to be open to world trade. For almost 300 years, the Spanish colonial government had confined commerce with other nations to the port of Manila through the galleon trade. Moreover, by royal decree, the governors of the provinces enjoyed until 1844 a monopoly over inter-island trade. Through the efforts of an English diplomat named Nicholas Loney, Manila relaxed trade and tariff policies even further so that the provincial ports could enjoy larger volumes of trade. As a sign of confidence, Loney, who was the only non-Spanish foreigner in Iloilo at the time, built the town's first stone warehouse, its stones and tiles coming from Manila. He built it on undesirable swampland along the deepest part of the mighty Iloilo River, whose muddy banks provided anchorage for ships. Loney also built a road to town, now Isidro de la Rama Street, which encouraged reclamation and further construction. In 1859, again through the efforts of Loney, Iloilo made the first direct export of sugar from the Visayas to Australia. Merchant houses, both foreign and local, like Kerr and Company and in Chausti, soon dotted the port area. Relocation of residents from the older districts of Arevalo, Haro, and Molo transpired, no longer by dint of decree, but by the attraction of fortunes to be made and a rich social and cultural life to be enjoyed. As a sign of their newfound prosperity, more and more Ilonggos started to build houses of strong materials like stone, hardwood, and galvanized iron. A similar frenzy of economic activity also attended the opening of the port of Cebu to foreign trade in 1860. Though based in Iloilo, Loney saw the potential of the other port and became responsible for the first exportation of hemp or abaca fiber from the port of Cebu to England. Although both open ports in the Visayas would carry a similar array of products in the next 2 quarters of a century, Iloilo would come to specialize in the rich sugar trade, earning its charter as a city in 1893 and the nickname Queen City of the South. Cebu's prosperity in trade, meanwhile, would initially hinge on a little sugar, some hemp, and a lot of copra and coconut oil. But the importance of these products would not be felt until the early 1900s. The coming of the Americans served to distribute and multiply wealth even further, with private initiative finally getting support from the authorities. The colonial government, anxious to win the hearts of the citizens, embarked on infrastructure spending the likes of which the islands had never seen before. Within the first decade of the new century, the ports of Iloilo and Cebu were equipped with concrete wharves and additional berthing space. The Americans also addressed the long-standing need to dredge the harbors to enable the ports to receive larger ships. The buildings of this period took on a utilitarian character, reflecting the more practical, egalitarian mood of the times. A concrete customs house took pride of place in the port areas, even as business transacted from the rows of warehouses along the wharves spilled over to the commercial districts. And yet, while Iloilo and Cebu may be called sisters by affinities of time, place, and circumstance, one cannot find two cities more different from each other. Today, traces of Iloilo's bountiful private-led economy can be seen in the preeminence and grace of private buildings and residences over that of less spectacular public structures. Even the payag of the Ilonggo hinterlands is meticulously built and finely articulated, a joy to behold. And yet, Iloilo, as a city, is like a city trying to hold back the flow of time. No new architecture has emerged to parallel the excitement of expression in the Spanish and American colonial periods. But the opposite appears to be true in Cebu, where the provincial capital seems to have been designed and scaled to preside over the city's social, political, and economic life. It is a city defined and shaped as well by the prudence and practical lifestyles of its dominant merchant class. Land poor and water poor, Cebu's economy has mainly thrived in trading, manufacturing, and services. Its rise as a new Queen City of the South is reflected in the emergence of new urban centers, opening up new spaces for bigger buildings. And the payag, for being at the bottom of Cebu's dynamic, upwardly mobile socio-economic hierarchies, is plain, even austere, and often indifferently expressed. Through the years, the faces of the two cities have been marred by the ravages of war, subsequent government neglect, unstable world prices of major products, and short memories aggravated by lack of foresight. The ports grow congested and ill kept. Implementation of grand expansion plans is slow and piecemeal. Any new infrastructure is readily gobbled up by the growing economies as soon as it is constructed. It is the same story elsewhere in the cities. The old jostle with and often is summarily replaced by the new. Cities, as organisms, suffer from a real inability to process rapid influxes of new influences and opportunities. The old port areas are no less important today, even with the advent of air travel as gateways of the Visayas. Yet, the stories they continue to tell are in danger of getting buried in grime, decay, and indifference. The voices of the old cities grow feeble, forgotten in the comings and goings of travelers who will not listen.
For pre-Hispanic Visayans, death was a journey. They prepared for the leave-taking by anointing and perfuming their dead, placing them in both coffins or jars and burying them in a variety of sites, often on the banks of rivers or near the sea. Or it was a journey to a more sacred dimension. But the dead remained with the living. They were buried under the family house and were provisioned with food offerings. The Spaniards brought with them another way of looking at death. Death was a time of stillness and waiting. So Filipinos learned to bury their dead in a common resting place, first in a churchyard cemetery in the middle of the poblacion, and later, beginning in the 18th century, when this was no longer practical, in a cemetery outside town. In cemeteries, it is the living who impose a human order upon the mysterious meanings of death. The Spanish colonial government enjoined the richer towns to construct a funerary chapel, or capilla, and a bone pit, or osario. Few towns could afford these added features, however, much less provide living quarters or habitación for the grave diggers and sepultureros. The central grounds of the cemetery were given to the general public. In the better cemeteries, the nichos, or stone chambers for the dead, were classified into the nichos para adultos and the niches for children. Choice lots were reserved for the priests, Spaniards, and members of the Principalia. In the poorer towns, however, it is as if the dead were left to fend for themselves. Today, in the majority of towns in the Visayas, the Spanish cemetery endures as the sole resting place for the dead. But in the cities, a new kind of space has perforce been created. In the modern cemetery, the old order and stratification of spaces remain. And yet there is a difference. Distanced much further now from the city's residential and activity centers, it has become a place both marginal and peripheral. The cemetery has also given way to the human profit motive, and the concern for efficiency, cost cutting, and maximization of space. Today, the cemetery is thus in danger of becoming a mere repository, no longer a sanctuary for departed souls. It is a place designed to dull the senses of the living into a continual forgetfulness, with little room for the personal, the memorable, and the intangible. What kind of spaces will we reserve for our dead in the future?
There is an old legend still alive in Bohol today that harks back to the time more than 350 years ago when a mighty duel was fought between a powerful Babaylan, high priest of the old folk religion by the name of Tamblot, and an advocate of the white man's faith in one God, a Roman Catholic priest named Padre Jose Santa Maria. It is a fact of history that Tamblot gathered 200 Boholanos in 1622 to resist colonization by the Spaniards. Tamblot was victorious in at least 2 encounters, but the legend of the duel signified the desperate struggle in the realm of the spirit between the old system of beliefs and the new. And the high priest Tamblot was making his last stand. The site he chose was the tower of the island's lone silver bell, which sat on top of a hill beside the mysterious Abatan River on the southwestern coast of Bohol. It was the perfect site for a victory. The silver bell was a powerful symbol, a bell so pure that the sound of its ringing, it is said, could be heard clear across and around the island. The Spaniards, as legends go, had one like it in Cebu, and it is said that the pure notes of its song could be heard across the sea to the island of Siquijor. If the bell could be silenced, then Tamlot's victory would be complete. So it came to pass that the townspeople gathered at the foot of the bell tower to witness the contest. Tamblot climbed to the belfry and tied a small white bird by its leg to the bell with a tiny piece of string. Then the Bailan stepped back and uttered a mysterious incantation. The bird started to flap its wings and then slowly rose up in the air. The crowd gasped in wonder, for the next thing they saw was the bird flying out of the window and towards the sky, with a great bell dangling from its tiny leg. Whereupon, Padre Santa Maria raised his hand at the fleeing bird and recited a powerful invocation in Latin. Suddenly, the bird faltered, cut off in mid-flight as the weight of its burden finally took its toll, and both bird and bell fell into the enchanted river below, never to be seen or heard again. The bell was indeed silenced, but the tower remained. It was an impasse that boded well for things to come. The tower, both in the idea and the form, was part of the vocabulary of power used in the colony by the Spanish crown. Built in tandem with the church, it served as a communication tower. A parish priest's sphere of influence was as wide as the reach of the sound of the great bells in his belfry. For the bells had a language of their own, and the pure country air, as well as the nearby water of rivers and seas, resonated with their messages. Was it time to go to Holy Mass or to say the Angelus? Did the bells toll for the dead? announced the union in matrimony of two souls? Or did they herald the arrival of new life, a baby newly born? The bells also served to ring the alarm during emergencies such as typhoon and fire. Built as part of a fortification or a defense system, the tower served as a lookout and relay station for the early warning message that spelled the difference between victory against marauders and slavery. Even before the Spaniards came, raiders had prowled the inter-island seas in search of slaves to be sold in a brisk trade with China and what is now Indonesia. At the center of this trade was the Sultanate of Sulu, and few settlements in the Visayas were spared the effects of its procurement expeditions. The conquest of Malacca by the Portuguese in 1511 and the arrival of the Spaniards in the Philippines shortly after introduced another complication, for the rivalry of the two Western powers proved disastrous for anyone caught in the crossfire. Thus, it was a combined threat of Muslim raiders and Portuguese adventurers that some affected chieftains, particularly those whose domains lay along the southern Boholano coastline, finally sought out the Spaniards in Cebu to plead protection in exchange for payment of tribute. The Portuguese threat was to subside after the signing of an agreement between the two colonial powers, but the Muslim raiding parties were to be the scourge of Christianized Visayans until well into the 19th century. Such attacks broke up families, disrupted community life, and wrought much destruction on the built world of both the colonizer and the colonized. In regularity and virulence, these raids reached a peak in the 1760s and were sustained for almost a century until the mid 1800s. It was during this period that Boholanos under Spanish authority mustered the spirit and courage to address the threat in an organized manner. An early warning system was established with the construction of watchtowers on promontories beside the sea. A watchtower in Dawis, one of the most beleaguered settlements in Bohol Island, was completed under the supervision of the Recollet Fathers in 1774. There are also Recollecting watchtowers in such important settlements as Baclayon, Lobok, and even inland in the town of Balilihan. But the towers in Luay, Panglao, and Maribojoc were the most strategically located to do the most good in sounding the alarm. A watchtower in Pamilacan Island off the town of Baclayon served as vanguard. Across the channel, in Cebu, it was the energetic parish priest of Bolhoon town, Padre Julian Bermejo of the Agustinian order, who organized an effective defense system against the raiders. Although all coastal towns in Cebu were to have watchtowers, it was Padre Bermejo who supervised the construction of towers along the most vulnerable area in the southeastern coast of the island, from the town of Sibonga to Santander. A tower atop a Bolhoon mountain overlooking the town had a magnificent view of the horizon in three directions. It was this tower that served as the vanguard in Padre Bermejo's early warning system. Old-timers today still tell hand-me-down stories of how the quiet of rural life was suddenly broken by the warning message relayed from tower to tower across the countryside. Aside from the ringing of bells, there were other means of communication as well. A watchman could fill a vessel with gunpowder and then torch it, and the warning message would explode across the water. At night, visual devices like colored flares were used. In the mid 1800s, Padre Bermejo, who had undergone military training, also spearheaded the building of boats and the training of civil defense units. Once equipped and armed, volunteer defenders of the various barangays could set sail as soon as there was a sighting to confront the marauders and do battle at sea. One may argue today that the watchtowers guarded the friars' domains, their painstakingly established settlements of converted souls. But the Muslim threat was not merely political and religious in nature. Certainly, it was also a war of cultures and economies. And it was in lifestyle and livelihood that the native folk themselves had much to lose. The story of the tower in Punta Cruz, in the town of Maribuco, is a case in point. It was in the year 1796 when the Reverend Padre Santiago del Corazon de Jesus was cura of the parish of Maribuco that the foundation of the present church was laid. The good father required all parishioners going to the old church for the administration of the sacraments to bring with them a piece of lime rock weighing not less than 2 kilos and already carved to specification. Failure to comply was met with the harsh penalty of 3 lashes of disciplina. For 18 years, through a combination of forced and voluntary labor, was the church built, and simultaneous with it, a flight of stone steps leading to a wharf below, the now ruined ramparts of a Catholic cemetery, and a watchtower in the barrio of Punta, where the wide sweep of the Maribojoc Bay ends in a strategic promontory. There is a wooden cross at the focal point of the watchtower complex. It dramatically faces the sea in the direction of Mindanao, as if it were a talisman placed there by the townspeople against the forces of destruction. Legend imbues this Christian icon with great mystical power. It is said that the cross is made from a large piece of driftwood that kept getting into the nets of local fishermen, no matter how often they threw it back into the sea. The truth, however, could be no less dramatic. Local historians say that most of the wood used in the Spanish constructions in the island were taken from the Tugas and Bayong forests of faraway Anda, over 100 kilometers up the northeastern coast of Bohol. The logs were said to be floated by sea and slowly tugged by boat along the coastal waters. There are stories among the people of Maribojoc about native sorcerers gifted with the arcane knowledge of the old religion who helped build the Spanish structures. It is said that under cover of night, these men lifted with bare hands the huge wooden beams used to hold up the roofs of the parish church and other structures. It is said that the wood used to make the cross at the watchtower was the same wood used in a carving of San Vicente Ferrer, the town's patron saint. The statue's first home was a prominently placed niche in the watchtower. When fame of its miraculous powers spread, the parish priest transferred the image to the Poblacion, where the image now occupies center stage in the well-preserved retablo of the Maribojoc Church. One may surmise that the watchtowers in other towns were built in much the same manner. How much love went into the building, how much was hate, how much was practicality and mutual interest, one will never know in exact measure. With many of the old bells and cannons gone, these watchtowers are sadly silent today. But they remain an eloquent symbol of the conquest of a people and their subsequent struggle to preserve the world such as it was.